The Your Mark on the World show is made possible by our sponsors, including Clean Energy Advisors.
Welcome to Your Mark on the World, bringing you another changemaker with champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and our guest today is Rod Turner. He's the CEO of Manhattan Street Capital. Rod, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Devin. It's great to be here.
Rod, you're doing some great things in what I think of broadly as being part of the crowdfunding space, but with respect especially to Regulation A+, as it's now called, doing later stage public and some private offerings. There's a little ambiguity around that. We'll talk about that ambiguity here in a minute, but that is an exciting, new, rapidly growing space in our capital markets. Give us just an overview quickly of Regulation A+.
So Regulation A+ is designed for mid-stage companies. The major differences about it are that companies are allowed to sell shares to any wealth level of investor worldwide. They don't have to be accredited anymore, and that the shares purchased by those investors can be liquid immediately after the offering. So it can be a type of public offering, and at the high end you can use Reg A+ to do a public offering to the NASDAQ or even to the New York Stock Exchange. And there are advantages in doing it that way over a conventional IPO, actually. So it's a versatile fundraising system that was surprisingly well written, pragmatically written. I mean by that it's well written. It's crafted in a way that will enable it to work. So mid-sized companies that tend to be limited to bank loans, often secured by the wealth of the president or the owner of the company, and where those loans are too small anyway and they have a high interest burden. Instead of that now, instead of having to do at the high end a reverse merger, which is very expensive and has a lot of uncertainty attached to its outcome, you can go straight away and do an offering through Reg A+. And any Tier 2 Reg A+ offering that completes, excuse my frog in the throat, is then automatically qualified to list on the OTC QB, and can list on the QX. On the QB, the purchase price for a brand new ticker symbol is $2,500, which is amazing. So at the high end, we have a NASDAQ IPO. In the middle, we have OTC market listings. And then we have companies that don't list. There are being built some marketplaces for those shares. And some companies that lock their shares but provide other mechanisms of liquidity that they define and that they deliver on post-offering. So it's a very versatile system.
It really is, and it's exciting to see everything that's beginning to develop around this in terms of figuring out whether or not your offering is a good fit for which market or any market for post-offering trading, and I think that's wonderful. Can you give us any examples of deals that you have completed or that you're working on and are excited about?
Yes, so not completed because we haven't completed any. We've been very selective in only wanting to work with companies that we thought were ideally fundable, which is at this point, because it's early days in Reg A+, we really depend upon consumer investor traction to fund them. Accredited investors are not participating much yet, nor institutions. So that reduces the funding window today by a large margin. It becomes quite a small funding window of companies that have such strong appeal that consumers say, yes, that company I want to exist. So a good example is a company that has FDA-approved technology, exclusive rights to it, and it's patented, and it's a pain treatment, which after a few sessions of treatment, you don't need to go back until 6 months have passed, and then you have a couple of sessions. It's been proven in a test center environment, scientifically studied, and they need to gear up and expand that business. I think a lot of consumers are going to say, yeah, they have an Aunt Ethel or, or themselves are in a lot of pain, and we know that painkillers don't work very well, and they're killing a lot of people. Frankly, they are very harmful. So I think that one will appeal. There's a stem cell company that I really love that has the ability to cause complete recovery of joint injuries in human beings. And when they're ready, I think a lot of people will resonate with that one. I personally, I have a lower back injury that I really don't want surgery for, but I'd like to fix it.
Yeah.
So those are good examples. Companies that make gadgets and so forth, they're also great examples, but they're more obvious. And real estate. Because real estate is, sorry?
I was just going to say, the crowdfunding marketplace seems to love real estate.
Yes.
And so how do you think real estate will fare in the A+ market? It's
already the biggest sector by far, about 50% in terms of dollars raised. And it has the existing strengths where you can identify what it is. There's an asset value involved. People can understand real estate and they want to buy more of it in many cases, but most people don't have the spare time or the capital to go out and buy a building or manage it necessarily. So it appeals that way, and they pay a yield typically, and that's also very appealing, especially in this low interest rate environment. So those are good reasons. And there's another advantage to Reg A. Generally speaking, the maximum you can raise is $50 million in a year and do a subsequent offering every year, which is enough for most companies, or many. But in real estate and in a couple of other industries like venture capital and private equity, when you can geographically divide your market of interest, say the US, into multiple regions, you can do a Reg A for each region in parallel. So you might raise 600 million for 12 different 50 million raises for 12 different regions of the country, and that's entirely legitimate. It's being done in real estate on a smaller scale than I just mentioned. So not many people are aware of that, but that's
an interesting value. Now, what is the advantage to the issuer of doing two or more raises all at once?
It gives them more flexibility. I think the more classical case is where they do one first to sort of check it, make sure, having carved out geographic regions ahead of time so they know where they're going. And once that first one is shown proof of concept, then roll out the others. But essentially, if you're a private equity firm or a VC firm, it can only be a debt-based VC firm, by the way, so up to 60% has to be debt. Actually, minimum 60% has to be debt. The rest can be equity. But in either case, 50 million is too small a fund. So you might use that to complement something, but that's not enough. Whereas if you do 4 or 5 of them, 200, 250 million, now you're talking a viable fund. Mm-hmm. And of course you can do more than that. So those are the reasons why that matters.
Can you do a Reg A offering for a BDC?
BDC, I'm not sure.
We call them business development corps. They're sort of publicly traded venture funds.
Yeah, I am not sure. Probably most of them would be structured as pure equity, which is the traditional venture model, in which case they couldn't do it. But if you start from the ground up with a mixed debt and equity plan and never allow the equity portion to exceed 40% of your holdings, then it's completely legitimate. And then you're talking about a VC fund that was funded by consumers. Consumers would love that.
Yeah, very interesting idea. Well, where do you think this market will go? You and I have talked a little bit in the past about the fact that if you go back to the 80s and 90s, there was a thriving opportunity among small investment banks taking relatively small companies public. Mm-hmm. The benefit to the public was that ordinary investors, not just wealthy investors, got to participate in offerings like Microsoft. Microsoft is probably the classic example, right?
Yeah, it was the right timing, yeah.
I think they went public at a market cap of like $300 million. Mm-hmm. And today they have a market cap of about $300 billion.
Yeah.
And so ordinary investors have participated in that 1,000-fold increase in valuation. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Facebook, that went public at a valuation of about $100 billion. and I think it's worth 150 billion or 200 billion today. So the ordinary investors only got to participate in,
Yeah.
50 or 100% growth. That's a short
And they weren't really able to get in at the issue price. They
Right.
were sort of pushed into the aftermarket, which is certainly the normal role.
Yeah. So how do you see the market evolving? Are we going to see another heyday in small company IPOs?
Well, there's a lot of variables there, of course, with Trump planning to reduce regulation. We'll see what that does. That might make regular IPOs easier. But what I think Reg A Plus's sweet spot is for small, medium companies. So I would say micro and small cap companies, which says companies that are in many cases would have been ready 4 or 5 years later, 6 years later to do a traditional IPO, depending on their stage. What we'll see with Reg A Plus when we hit stride, which we're not there yet, is we'll see more established companies with sizable revenues in many cases, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 million in sales each year, and some cases profitable, but they want to raise a sizable sum and they're not ready for a regular IPO. And even if they were ready for a regular IPO, you can do it more easily using Reg A Plus, because if you with the IPO do not meet the funding minimum to list on, say, the NASDAQ, then it used to be that was it. You'd have to pack your bags and go home, and you hadn't raised $1. With Reg A Plus, you just close the offering at what you raised, and that was a successful transaction, and you come back and list a year or two later on NASDAQ, and in the meantime you list on the OTCQX or something. So that versatility is powerful. We'll see a lot of companies doing that are further along. Most of the companies so far that we've seen, especially the US-based companies, have been earlier stage at the moment because they're the more early adopters of funding mechanisms like this. The more established companies have more established, more seasoned executives running them, and they've got decades of knowledge that you can't do this stuff. Everyone knows about the quiet period, whereas you have a loud period with a Reg A Plus offering where you're supposed to promote the offering to everybody, and as long as you're honest about it, there's no problem with that.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because that's a really important distinction as you talk about the difference between the traditional IPO and the Reg A. What are the rules about making disclosures and who can talk, who can say what during the offering, before the offering, right after the offering? What does it look like?
Yeah, so actually it's possible and reasonable and expected that the top executives, the senior management of the company, will conduct webinars, and if they can afford it, a roadshow in order to promote their offering. And they are allowed to discuss anything. They're not allowed to get too ambitious on forecasts of where they'll go. That would be a liability risk later. And they're also the biggest obligation from the SEC is that you mustn't advantage one investor or one group over others. So if somebody gives you a particularly interesting question wherever, it could have been a webinar or through a comment online, you have to make sure everyone gets the answer and the question so they know where they stand equally. That's the only real limitation beyond honesty. You can't say this new electric battery system is going to revolutionize the world. Okay, no, it isn't. It's neat. It'll do what it'll do, but it won't revolutionize the world. So the limits are very straightforward, actually, and I would say not very limiting.
Well, that's good.
Which is,
and if I understand you correctly, the issuer is encouraged to be a part of that dialogue, whereas in the traditional IPO, the investment bank is out there doing the pitching, and the issuer is required to be essentially silent.
in most everything. You're right, exactly, except the road show. So this is very different, and for credibility's sake, they need to be involved in the video offering, and as much founder involvement as possible is great, because then you develop the investors can see if they like or trust the person who's talking to them rather than hearing about them. Third party once removed is just not going to work.
Now, are people going to be able to invest in your offerings through a Schwab account, a TD Ameritrade account, or are they going to have to wire you funds or ACH funds directly from a bank to get into the deal?
It depends. So it depends on the nature of their account. So I have a checkbook on my brokerage account, and I can do ACH or checks from it. I can do wires. We're adding credit. Actually, we're adding debit cards for the U.S. We don't want to get into a situation where people are effectively borrowing money to invest in a company that has its own risk. But using a debit card is a prudent way to go. There are a lot of people these days that don't have checkbooks out of choice. So providing them that option will help. But it's the usual funding mechanisms, and you can use IRA money and so forth as well.
Excellent. Well, this is a very intriguing, exciting space. If you were, I suspect one of the key things that people ask you, entrepreneurs, right? Mm-hmm. How do I do this? When am I ready? What is the advice you give them on trying to prepare for a Reg A offering and knowing when it's time?
Well, that is a challenging question to answer because it depends so much on each company. Essentially, when they're concept companies, they're ideas without a team and so forth, then I recommend against it because the likelihood of successful funding is low and the likelihood of a lawsuit in the future is high because we all know the inherent risk of early stage companies. So part of it is risk, risk aversion. We don't want lawsuits, so let's make sure we do things that are relatively low risk. Part of it is the fundamentals of the company and the nature of the trends and so forth. Essentially, is this company going to be around for the long haul? Do they have the quality team and the traction or stupendous technology breakthroughs that make it highly likely that they'll be very successful over time? And then when it comes to readiness and so forth and getting ready for the Reg A Plus offering, most of that is, there's a lot of involvement, but most of that is being handled by specialists. A marketing agency, we add a lot of value in bringing in a marketing agency that is excellent and knows what they're doing. And you have a legal service provider conducting the filing, an auditor, almost always have to have an auditor involved. So these are specialists, and as long as the company picks the right advisors, which we can help them with, of course, then it's not going to be that painful. There's a lot of moving parts, and there's enough decisions about the nature of the offering, but none of it's overwhelming. Mostly I find people pleasantly surprised at how smooth the process can be. At the SEC, for example, we were worried they might not be very rapid to respond to these transactions, to these filings, but they're really great. They're efficient and consistent. So, it takes about 60 days from entering their process to getting qualified in most cases. There are some faster and some slower, but that's pretty good.
How does the testing the waters feature work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So up until now, virtually every use of test the waters has been with companies that are doing an offering. They're committed already, and they use it as a way to spend money on marketing and generate early engagement. And it's expensive and inefficient for that, in my opinion. Sometimes people have stayed because their audit was delayed or something for 6 months in test the waters, and basically the early adopters who loved what you were doing have got bored and they're on vacation now or doing something else completely. So that's not the optimum use, in my opinion. The optimum use has not been done, where the idea of it is that companies that are not sure if they can fit, before they spend any money on a dedicated audit or on anything else, can inexpensively test their offering beforehand, literally, and if it goes well, then engage the service providers and go ahead and do the real thing later. So we're actually doing a thing called Test the Waters Audition, which is aimed at that. Companies that are not committed but want to have, we're starting off, I think, at about $5,000 for that, including marketing, so that we can test messages with them. We can get our community involved in advising them and giving them feedback so that they'll get a clear answer. You know, with digital marketing, it isn't rocket science to tell if we're getting through. As long as we're using the right message, we test the messages first to find out. None of this is rocket science. So then we can fairly inexpensively, in a couple of months, at a modest cost, find out if a company fits. I think that's the way that test the waters should be used. And it's not limited to Reg A+. You can use, as long as there's a legitimate way that the SEC allows, which is not always the case. Where it's allowed, it's a good thing to do, to informally test the interest in your company.
Fantastic. This is all just fascinating to me, and I think to so many entrepreneurs who suddenly see this new path to capitalization and ultimately liquidity.
Yeah.
Really exciting for entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Rod, I want to just ask you a couple of personal questions while we've got you. You are someone I admire. You're someone that a lot of people admire. Who do you admire? Who do you look up to?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I don't have the glorious example where one person embodies everything that I admire. But Steve Jobs is in many ways the person I admire the most in business. You know, he has notable exceptions, i.e. the way that he treated his first wife and daughter was abysmal and unacceptable. And he was never, when he led Apple, charitable. The company wasn't charitable. It isn't charitable. So those things are negatives big time. But when I look at the positive side of him, what impresses me the most is that, you know, I didn't know all of this stuff before he died. Some of these things I learned afterwards. But he was a pretty messed up guy. And he had serious personal challenges to function every day. His home in a beautiful neighborhood of not Silicon Valley, in the peninsula going up to San Francisco. His home was a gorgeous home, but hardly furnished because he couldn't find furniture that measured up to his standards. So he ended up, you know, he was living the life of bliss that such a successful man would live with no bloody furniture, excuse my French. But that's an example of how much of a struggle that he lived, and I think those are the fact that he wasn't as easy for him to make it through his career and his life makes me all the more impressed with how tremendous the results were. So many entrepreneurs would have done Apple 1.0, as it were, when he was there the first time and got booted out the way he was. And then, you know, gone off and cut down trees for the rest of their life, or lived on a beach, or done something else, right? You know, retreated. But he didn't retreat. He went on again and again and again with so many successes. I remember the introduction of the iPhone, and I was thinking, well, I suppose they could do a good job. I mean, there's so many good products out already. And I was into smartphones in 2003, you know, but he knocked it out of the park, didn't he?
Yeah.
So impressed with him because of his obvious limitations as a human being, but succeeding anyway.
Interesting take. Now, you could be doing anything, and I realize that what you're doing isn't purely charitable, but you have sought to make a difference in the world. You're doing something I consider to be really good and noble. Why are you doing this?
So I think it's a combination of things. It's the opportunistic side of me, seeing as I believe this will be, Reg A Plus will be a 60 billion capital raise per year business, you know, once it gets established. So there's the opportunistic side. There's the fact that I think I understand this space very well, so I can add value here. It's sort of tuned to me, assessing entrepreneurs and their plans and so forth. And there are two other reasons. One is that when you are leading a business of scale, as you know, you can do more good than when you're one person. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are, and I don't come close to the wealthy people, the really wealthy people out there, or many others. But any one individual, there's a finite amount that you can do, and I'm always fighting that. Where I want to do more to help people that are unfortunate or gated by something. And by building a successful business, I'll be able to do more of that for our people and for the general public where relevant, where there's need. So, that's the altruistic part. When we launched the company first in 2 years ago, I initially chose to focus on women-led businesses, and the company name was Fund Athena, because there's such a funding gap for women, as you know better than me. It didn't work as a strategy. The Reg A plus market was too small, and even now it's too small to only focus on the companies led by women. But that was reflective of the fact that there's huge need. For a woman who's great, with a great idea to get venture capital raised, is very, very over the top challenging.
Yeah.
And that has to change. And, we were going to be a part of that change. We have that program within Manhattan Street Capital still. And that's why, because it's needed, but we can't only do that to be big enough as a company at this stage.
Rod, what's your what's your superpower?
Well, thank you. I think that's a very positive statement. I don't know whether I have any superpowers really, but probably the thing which has done the best for me is that I'm always interested and always learning, always paying attention. So I pick up ideas in the most unexpected places, and then I sort of look at them like this, and I find a way to apply a lot of them in completely different areas of life and in business. And that has been amazing. I mean, people say to me, wow, that was incredible, Rod. How did you do that? That's so innovative. And I'm thinking, well, it wasn't even innovative. I just took something over here that worked and put it over here where it was needed. That's literally a lot of what I do. But you don't get that unless you're paying attention in the boring conversation with somebody about something else. Because when you do pay attention and you're listening, there's so much neat stuff. There's so many neat ideas and solutions waiting for a problem. Oh, there's a problem over there. I did that in my car racing days to great effect. It was super.
Yeah. Well, Rod, we're thrilled that you would take the time to be with us today. Before you go, tell people how they can learn more about Manhattan Street Capital and connect with you.
Yeah, the best way is by email. Rod Turner at manhattanstreetcapital.com, spelled the way it sounds. We're not actually in Manhattan, but that branding was what I was looking for with that name. It's like, if we're going to change from Fund Athena to a new name, it better be a good one.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, Rod, we, again, appreciate you being here and wish you every success in growing Manhattan Street Capital and helping to accelerate capital for women and other entrepreneurs.
And Devin, thank you so much for having me here. I feel very fortunate, and I'm blessed that you invited me to come in. And thank you, everyone who is watching. I appreciate you taking the time, and I hope that this was worthwhile for you.
Yeah, thanks, Rod. Let's do some good. Clean Energy Advisors creates investment opportunities in the renewable energy sector that provide clients with predictable income, preservation of capital, and positive impact. Clean Energy Advisors is committed to providing clients with investment opportunities with both market rates of return and measurable impact.
Thank you for listening. This podcast was recorded via Google Hangouts on Air and is available at youtube.com/Devin Thorpe. Subscribe to this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes by searching for Your Mark on the World. Every weekday, Devin hosts a CEO, celebrity, entrepreneur, or other changemaker here on the Your Mark on the World show to inspire and prepare you to make your mark. Devin is a champion of social good, writing about, advocating for, and advising people who are doing good. He is a Forbes contributor who is a recognized thought leader in social entrepreneurship, impact investing, and crowdfunding. To book Devin as a speaker, visit devinthorpe.com. Learn more about Devin's work at yourmarkontheworld.com.